Hello, and welcome to Culture Shocked, the pop culture podcast brought to you by three aging millennials and our outdated opinions. I'm your host, Corey, and I'd like to add a trigger warning right at the top. If you have a weak stomach, or don't like to hear the details of some of the most horrendous crimes ever committed, then I'd change the episode. But if you, like me, want to know every detail so you can hate these monsters the way they deserve to be hated, then welcome to Corey's Killer Corner. I have done a few of the heavy hitters with Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK, and the Night Stalker. But today, I'm going to dive deep into arguably the most well-known and most monstrous serial killer to ever exist. One who terrified the citizens in multiple different cities and states from January of 1974 to February 9th, 1978, raping, murdering, and mutilating at least 20 confirmed young women. The night before his execution, he confessed to over 30, and they suspect him of many, many more than that. I am talking, of course, about Ted Bundy.
Let's say I'm walking down a dark road, out in the woods somewhere. There's nobody for miles around.
I want to play this part tonight.
When somebody is in the bushes off to the side of the road, and they're watching me, and they watch me walk all the way down the street. And when I get right to the place where they are behind the bushes, they jump out. And they grab me. They drag me to the bushes. The person starts to rape me. Is there anything that I could do to change the outcome?
The only thing you could do to change the outcome would be to scream and fight like hell to get away.
That's the only thing?
So,
Participation, nothing?
not that I can imagine.
No?
You better fight like hell and hope that you get it.
Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24th, 1946, to his biological mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His biological father was never known. His mother claimed it was a United States Air Force veteran named Jack Worthington, who abandoned her just after finding out she was pregnant, but this was never confirmed. It was heavily speculated for a long time that Ted may have even been the product of incest, and that Eleanor's own father impregnated her. But in 2020, in a documentary called Crazy Not Insane, psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis claimed that she received a blood sample of Ted Bundy's DNA, and tests confirmed that he was not the product of incest. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Why did he say biological mother? Isn't that obvious? And usually, yes. But in this particularly messed up story, no. And I will explain why. To avoid the stigma of a small town in the 1940s, everyone in Ted's life, including himself, were told that his grandparents were his mother and father, and his mother was actually his older sister. This went on for many years, and how he found out is muddled. Ted himself claims he learned the truth when he found his birth certificate with his sister's name under mother and nobody listed as the father. But there were many stories from other people close to Ted about how this came out. Ted was a very notorious liar and manipulator, so take any story he tells with a grain of salt. But either way, this left him with a lifelong resentment of his mother for not telling him herself. In a few interviews, Bundy expressed his love and admiration for his grandfather Samuel, while also saying that he was a rageful and violent man who would beat his wife Eleanor and their dog. He said he would swing cats by their tails and express racist and xenophobic attitudes. Ted also told reporters that his grandmother also frequently went for electroconvulsive therapy to deal with her depression, and she couldn't even leave the house under his grandfather's strict ruling. But every single person outside of Ted's own mind said that all of that couldn't be further from the truth. Most other people said that Samuel was a fine man who was very gentle with his family and pets. One of Ted's cousins said, "From my little exposure to him, nothing could be further from the truth. His daughters loved him dearly. They only ever had fond memories of him." Most experts, and myself, think that Ted was trying to paint a picture of a horrible upbringing to try and justify the way he was and the horrible things he eventually did. In 1950, Eleanor changed her surname from Cowell to Nelson and moved from Philadelphia, PA to Tacoma, Washington to start over. 1 year after moving there, she met a man who caught her eye at a church event. His name was Johnny Culpepper Bundy. They were quickly married, and Johnny legally adopted Ted, making him officially Ted Bundy. Over the years, they had 4 children together, and Ted never really fit in, despite Johnny's constant attempts to include him in camping trips, fishing outings, and even Boy Scouts. Ted never really warmed up to him in any way. Ted once told a girlfriend that he didn't warm up to Johnny because he wasn't very bright and didn't make much money, which just kind of shows you a bit more about who Ted Bundy really is. Ted showed signs of disturbing behavior at a very young age. Sandy Holt, a childhood neighbor in Tacoma, said Ted was a mean-spirited kid who enjoyed inflicting pain and suffering and fear. She said he once engaged in animal cruelty by hanging a cat from his backyard clothesline and setting it on fire. She also claimed that he would force children into the woods, make them strip down, and then he would terrorize them. He was also known to make tiger traps, digging holes in the ground with sharp sticks and covering them with leaves. In one instance, a young girl fell into one of these holes and ripped her leg all open and needed stitches. Ted would later tell reporters that during his younger years in Tacoma, he would search dumps and trash cans for pictures of naked women. He would try to find detective magazines to peruse. He particularly liked the ones including sexual violence, depicting women who had been tortured or maimed in some way. He then later stated to another reporter that he never ever read detective novels and shuddered at the thought of anyone who would. In my personal opinion, that is somebody who definitely loves that stuff would say when asked in an accusing way. Do you like smutty detective novels and sexual violence? Ew, gross. Pfft, who would even like that? Like, seriously, gross. That's guilty behavior. He confessed that during his later years, he would stroll up and down the streets looking for open drapes so he could spy on women in hopes to catch them in states of undress. He would do this whilst also mimicking the voices of his favorite politicians. He was pretending to be politicians, being perverts. Oh, how right Ted was, and he didn't even know it yet. Ted told reporters that this time in high school was very hard. He was mercilessly teased and ridiculed. He was pointed at and laughed at in the gym showers, had cold water poured on him multiple times in there, and harassed constantly. But again, as we've already seen multiple times, that was probably a lie. Many classmates from Woodrow Wilson High School told reporters that Ted was well-known and well-liked. He was a medium-sized fish in a large pond, mostly invisible. After he graduated high school in 1965, Ted decided to enroll in college at the University of Puget Sound. He stayed there for 1 year and then transferred to the much larger University of Washington to study Chinese. In 1967, he found what he referred to as the only woman I ever truly loved, Diane Edwards. In early 1968, Ted decided to leave college and work several minimum wage jobs to get by, and he also volunteered at the Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. This is where his love for politics and politicians really bloomed. He became the driver and bodyguard for a prospective governor of Washington, Arthur Fletcher. When Diane graduated college in the spring of '68, she moved to San Francisco. Ted, shortly after, followed her after earning a scholarship to learn Chinese at Stanford University. In August of that year, Ted attended the 1968 Republican National Convention in Miami. Shortly after this, Diane ended their relationship and moved home to California. She stated that she couldn't handle his immaturity and lack of ambition anymore. She later blamed herself for making him what he was. But if anything, she held it off for a while and got very lucky that she wasn't his first victim. This breakup absolutely devastated Ted, and it threw him into a whirlwind of bad thoughts and worse actions. He moved around from Colorado and Arkansas, staying with family along the way. He then settled in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he enrolled in Temple University. He would frequently travel to New York City. This is where he got very heavily into pornography. He immersed himself into violently pornographic literature to help ease the pain from the breakup with Diane. This is also around the time it is believed that Ted found out about his true parentage back in Vermont. Bundy eventually returned to Washington in 1969, where he met Elizabeth Kaufner, a single mother who worked as a secretary at the University of Washington School of Medicine. They were together, even leading through his first incarceration in 1976. Bundy became a father figure and a role model for Elizabeth's daughter, Molly. From the ages of 3 to 7, he seemed like a good father figure in her life and was, by all intents and purposes, a normal stepfather. But from ages 7 to 10, she recalled later in an interview that he was quite abusive and sexually inappropriate towards her. She recounts things like being smacked in the face, knocked all around, almost drowning once, indecent exposure by him, and sexual touching that he would play off as accidents or just games. In 1970, Bundy re-enrolled himself in the University of Washington, with his major being psychology. He quickly becomes loved by his professors and easily hit honor student status. That's one of the things about Ted Bundy. He was a very smart, handsome, and charming person. Nobody would even look at him twice when it came to harming women. He just didn't seem the type.
Ted Bundy wasn't a Charles Manson type person. He was the guy next door. He was the guy you'd meet up at the University of Utah and have coffee with and, be intrigued by him.
In 1971, Bundy got a job at the Seattle Suicide Hotline Crisis Center. There he worked with a former Seattle police officer and aspiring crime author, Ann Rule. She went on to write one of the most definitive Bundy biographies, The Stranger Beside Me. She said that she didn't see anything disturbing about him during their time working together. She said that he was very solicitous and empathetic.
At the crisis clinic, we were partners, and I spent every Sunday and every Tuesday night locked up all alone with Ted Bundy in this big old Victorian house, saving lives together. We were on manning the suicide lines, and when I left about 4 o'clock in the morning, he would walk me out to my car and he'd say, "Ann, be sure you lock the door because I don't want anything bad to happen to you on the way home." And if anyone had told me then that I had been locked up with the most dangerous man probably in America, I would have said, "You're crazy."
After graduating from UW in 1972, Bundy joined a new re-electoral campaign for Governor Daniel J. Evans. Bundy went undercover for Evans and posed as a student to get close to his opponent, Albert Rossellini. He brought back speeches and plans for Rossellini's campaign. That impressed Evans, and it got Bundy appointed to the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. After winning the election, Evans then made Bundy an assistant to Ross Davis, chairman of the Washington State Republican Party. Davis said about Bundy that he was smart, aggressive, and a believer in the system. In 1973, despite having low LSAT scores, because of his connections, Bundy was accepted into law school at the University of Utah. During a trip to California on Republican Party business, he rekindled his flame with Diane, who was blown away by his transformation from the unenthusiastic, lazy man that she left to now being a law student and traveling with the Republican Party as a type of representative. He was still dating Elizabeth during this time as well. Neither woman knew about each other. He went as far as flying Diane to Utah many times to stay with him and introducing her as his fiancée to Governor Davis. Randomly, in 1974, Bundy fully cut ties with Diane, dodging her calls and not writing her back. After a month of trying, she finally was able to reach him on the telephone. When she demanded to know why he abruptly ended their relationship, he only answered back with, "Diane, I have no idea what you're talking about," and hung up the phone. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Bundy later said in an interview, "I just wanted to prove to myself that I could marry her." In response, Diane told reporters, Ted's high-power courtship in the latter part of '73 had been deliberately planned, that he had waited all those years to be in a position where he could make me fall in love with him, so that he could drop me and reject me the way I rejected him. This is around the time Bundy had stopped going to law school classes altogether, and women started disappearing in the Pacific Northwest. Now that is going to bring us to the hard part of the episode to get through. He did some truly heinous things, so this is your last warning for the disturbing details I am about to discuss. If you're still here, let's continue. There is no consensus as to when Bundy began killing women. He told different stories to different people and refused to divulge the specifics of his earliest crimes, even as he confessed in graphic detail to dozens of later murders in the days preceding his execution. Bundy told psychologist Art Norman that he attempted his first kidnapping in Ocean City, New Jersey in 1969, but did not kill anyone until sometime in 1971 in Seattle. He told Norman that he killed 2 women in Atlantic City while visiting family in Philadelphia in 1969. Bundy hinted to homicide detective Robert Keppel that he committed a murder in Seattle in 1972 and another murder in 1973 that involved a hitchhiker, but he refused to elaborate further. Roll and Keppel both believed that he might have started killing as a teenager. Bundy's earliest documented homicides were committed in 1974 when he was 27. By his own admission, he had by then mastered the necessary skills in the era before the DNA profiling to leave minimal incriminating forensic evidence at crime scenes. Shortly after midnight, on January 4th, 1974, around the time that he had terminated his relationship with Diane, Bundy entered the basement apartment of 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a dancer and student at UW in Seattle's University District. After bludgeoning Sparks with a metal rod from her bed frame, he sexually assaulted her with the same rod, causing extensive internal injuries and rupturing her bladder. Sparks remained unconscious in the hospital for 10 days, and although she survived, she was left with permanent brain damage and significant loss to her vision and hearing. In the early morning hours of February 1st, Bundy broke into the basement room of 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, a UW undergraduate who broadcast morning radio weather reports for skiers. He beat her unconscious, dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse, and boots, and took her with him. He later stated that he drove Healy to a secluded area, then raped her and murdered her before dumping her body. During the first half of 1974, female college students disappeared at a rate of about 1 per month. There were many serial killers in the 70s killing co-eds. I will eventually cover Ed Kemper, who was called the co-ed killer. He's another very interesting case that did some brutal things. On March 12th, Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, left her dormitory to attend a jazz concert on campus but never arrived. Bundy claimed that he burned Manson's skull in his girlfriend's fireplace, down to the last ash, in a fit of paranoia and cleanliness. On April 17th, 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt disappeared while on her way to the dorm room after an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. 2 female Central Washington students later came forward to report encounters. one on the night of Rancourt's disappearance, and the other 3 nights earlier, with a man wearing a sling who was asking for help carrying a load of books to his brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. This was a huge go-to for Bundy. He liked to play the injured, handsome stranger that most women would swoon over and try to help in any way they could. He was appealing to what he considered their maternal instinct. On May 6, Roberta Kathleen Parks, age 22, left her dormitory at Oregon State University in Corvallis to have coffee with friends, but never arrived. Bundy claimed that he spotted Parks in the cafeteria and persuaded her to go with him to a bar. After they got into his car, he tied and gagged Parks and drove her back to Washington to be killed, raping her twice along the way. On June 1st, Brenda Carol Ball, age 22, disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Berrien, near Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. She was last seen in the parking lot, talking to a brown-haired man with his arm in a sling. Sound familiar? Bundy later stated he brought Ball back to his residence, where they had a consensual sexual encounter, before he strangled her while she was sleeping. Although this failed to explain the damage done to her skull, investigators from Seattle and King County grew increasingly concerned. There was no significant physical evidence, and the missing women had little in common, apart from a similar appearance: young, attractive white students with long brown hair parted in the middle, which later they attributed to the look of Diane, his original love. This was very similar to her look, long brown hair parted in the middle. It seemed to be some kind of thing for him. In the early hours of June 11th, 18-year-old UW student Georgianne Hawkins vanished while walking down a brightly lit alley between her boyfriend's dormitory residence and her sorority house. The next morning, 3 Seattle homicide detectives and a criminalist combed the entire alleyway on their hands and knees, finding nothing. No evidence whatsoever. Bundy later told Keppel that he lured Hawkins to his car and knocked her unconscious with a crowbar. After handcuffing her, he drove her to Issaquah, a suburb 20 miles east of Seattle, where he strangled her and spent the entire night with her body. The next afternoon, he returned to the UW alley and, in the very midst of a major crime scene investigation, located and gathered Hawkins' earrings and one of her shoes, where he had left them in the parking lot, and departed, unobserved. It was a feat so brazen, wrote Keppel, that it astonishes police even today. Bundy said he revisited Hawkins' corpse on 3 occasions. After her disappearance was publicized, witnesses came forward to report seeing a man on crutches, with a leg cast and carrying a briefcase, in an alley behind a nearby dormitory on the night of her disappearance. Again, playing the injured, desperate for help victim. One woman recalled that the man asked her to help him carry the case to his car, a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. Despite this period, Bundy was working in Olympia as an assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee, where he, and get this, wrote a pamphlet for women on rape prevention. Yes, that's correct. Ted Bundy wrote a pamphlet on rape prevention. Later, he worked at the Department of Emergency Services, a state government agency that was involved in the search for these missing women. At the DES, he met and began dating Carol Ann Boone, a twice-divorced mother of 2, who would play an important role in the final phase of his life 6 years later. Reports of the brutal attack on Sparks and the 6 missing women appeared prominently in newspapers and on television throughout Washington and Oregon. Fear spread among the population. Hitchhiking by young women dropped heavily. Pressure mounted on law enforcement agencies, but the scarcity of physical evidence severely hampered them. Police would not provide reporters with the little information that was available for fear of compromising the investigation. Further similarities between the victims were noted. The disappearances all took place at night, usually near ongoing construction work, and were within a week of midterm or final exams. All of the victims were wearing slacks or blue jeans when they disappeared. And at many crime scenes, there were sightings of a man wearing a cast or a sling and driving a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. So he wasn't being very smart here. He was even using the name Ted when luring a lot of these women away, and the Beetle was his own personal vehicle. The Washington and Oregon murders culminated on July 14th with the abduction in broad daylight of 2 young women from a crowded beach at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah. 4 female witnesses described an attractive young man wearing a white tennis outfit, and his left arm was in a sling, speaking with a light accent, perhaps Canadian or British, introducing himself as Ted. He asked for their help in unloading a sailboat from his tan or bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. 3 refused. 1 accompanied him as far as his car, saw that there was no sailboat, and fled. 3 additional witnesses saw Ted approach 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott, a probation caseworker at the King County Juvenile Court, and watched her leave the beach in his company. About 4 hours later, Denise Marie Naslund, a 19-year-old woman who was studying to become a computer programmer, left a picnic to go to the restroom and never returned. Bundy told FBI agent William Hagmeyer that Ott was still alive when he returned with Naslund, and that he forced one to watch as he assaulted and murdered the other, but he later denied this in an interview with Lewis the night before his execution. King County Police, finally armed with a detailed description of their suspect and his car, posted flyers throughout Seattle area. A composite sketch was printed in regional newspapers and broadcast on local television stations. Elizabeth Rule, a DES employee, and a UW psychology professor all recognized the profile, the sketch, and the car, and reported Bundy as a possible suspect. But detectives, who were receiving up to 200 tips per day, thought it unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the man they're looking for. This is stupid. Bad police officers. Bad. On September 6th, 2 hunters stumbled across the skeletal remains of Ott and Naslund near the Service Road in Issaquah, only 2 miles east of Lake Sammamish State Park. An extra femur and several vertebrae found at the site were later identified by Bundy as those of Hawkins. 6 months later, forestry students from Green River Community College discovered the skull and mandibles of Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball on Taylor Mountain, where Bundy frequently hiked, just east of Issaquah. Manson's remains were never recovered. In August of 1974, Bundy received a second acceptance from the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City, leaving Elizabeth in Seattle. While he called her often, he dated at least a dozen other women.
When I was living in Salt Lake City particularly, I was dating women all the time and having just normal, good, positive relationships where I felt very comfortable. It could be very bizarre at times. I'd say, on the one hand, meet a girl, take her home, and we could sleep together and enjoy each other. And there might be a body in the closet. That's pretty bizarre.
As he studied the first-year law curriculum a second time, Bundy was devastated to find out that the other students, quote, had some intellectual capacity that he did not. He found the classes completely incomprehensible. It was a great disappointment to me, he said. A new string of homicides began the following month, including 2 that would remain undiscovered until Bundy confessed to them shortly before his execution. On September 7th, Bundy raped and strangled a still unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho, then returned the next day to photograph and dismember the corpse before disposing of the remains in a nearby river. On October 2nd, he abducted 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in Holiday, Utah, a suburb of Salt Lake City. Bundy confessed that Wilcox was walking on a poorly lit main roadway when he parked his car and forced her into an orchard at knife point. He then restrained her, put her into his vehicle, and drove her back to his apartment, where he allegedly kept her for 24 hours. Bundy informed investigators that her remains were buried near Capitol Reef National Park. but they were never found. On October 18th, Melissa Ann Smith, a 17-year-old daughter of the police chief of Midvale, disappeared after leaving a pizza parlor around 9:30 p.m. Her nude body was found in a nearby mountainous area 9 days later. Post-mortem examination indicated that she may have remained alive for up to 7 days following her disappearance. On October 31st, Laura and Amy, also age 17, disappeared 25 miles south of Lehigh after leaving a Halloween party by herself just after midnight. Her nude body was found by hikers 9 miles away in American Foot Canyon on Thanksgiving Day. The medical examiner estimated that Amy had died on November 20th, 20 days after her disappearance. Both Smith and Amy had been beaten, raped, sodomized, and strangled with nylon stockings. Years later, Bundy described his post-mortem rituals with the corpses of Smith and Amy, including hair shampooing and application of makeup. For those of you who didn't know this much about Bundy, there you go. He was so much more than just a woman murderer. The dude revisited and reviolated these bodies for weeks or maybe even months sometimes. In the late afternoon of November 8th, Bundy approached 18-year-old telephone operator Carol Duranch at Fashion Place Mall in Murray, less than a mile from the Midvale restaurant where Smith was last seen.
A man approached me and said, "Is your license plate KAD 032? And I said yes, and he introduced himself as Officer Roseland. And he said that someone had been caught trying to break into my car. I told him there was nothing missing, and he asked me if I would come with him over to the substation because they were holding the man that had tried to break into my car. At that time, if I could see a badge or some kind of identification, and he promptly just flipped out his wallet and showed me a badge. I thought it was a little strange, but I just thought, maybe he's off duty, undercover. It occurred to me, that he wasn't who he said he was, and that something really bad was going to happen. And he grabbed my wrist and put a handcuff on my left wrist. I knew he was going to kill me. And I thought, no one's ever going to know what happened to me. I fought outside the car, and I finally just broke away, and a car started coming towards us. So I broke away and ran towards the car.
Later that evening, Deborah Jean Kent, a 17-year-old student at Viewmont High School in Bountiful, disappeared after leaving a theater production of the school to pick up her brother. The school's drama teacher and students told police that a stranger had asked each of them to come out into the parking lot to identify a car. Another student later saw the same man pacing in the rear of the auditorium, and the drama teacher spotted him again shortly before the end of the play. Outside the auditorium, investigators found a key that unlocked the handcuff removed from Duranch's wrist. Bundy eventually admitted to abducting Kent and keeping her at his apartment for a day, stating, quote, she was alive during half of it. In November, Elizabeth called King County Police a second time after reading that young women were disappearing in towns surrounding Salt Lake City. Detective Randy Hergensheimer of the Major Crimes Division interviewed her in detail. By then, Bundy had risen considerably on the King County's hierarchy of suspicion, but the Lake Sammamish witness considered the most reliable by detectives failed to identify him from a photo lineup. One thing people don't know about Ted Bundy was, all he had to do was change one little thing about his face, and he looked completely different. That's why he got away with so many things. In December, Elizabeth called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and repeated her suspicions. Bundy's name was added to their list of suspects, but at the time, no credible forensic evidence linked him to the Utah murders. Wow, just wow. How many times does she have to tell you guys? In January 1975, Bundy returned to Seattle after his final exams and spent a week with Elizabeth. She did not tell him that she had reported him to the police on 3 occasions. In 1975, Bundy shifted much of his criminal activity eastward, from his base in Utah to Colorado. On January 12th, a 23-year-old registered nurse named Corinne Eileen Campbell disappeared while walking down a well-lit hallway between the elevator and her room at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village. Her nude body was found a month later next to a dirt road just outside the resort. According to the coroner's report, she had been killed by blows to her head from a blunt instrument that left distinctive linear groove depressions in her skull. Her assailant had slit her left earlobe, and her body also had deep cuts from a sharp weapon. On March 15th, Vail ski instructor Julie Lyle Cunningham, age 26, disappeared while walking from her apartment to a dinner date with a friend. Bundy later told Colorado investigators that he approached Cunningham on crutches and asked her to help carry his ski boots to his car, where he clubbed and handcuffed her before sexually assaulting her at a secondary site near Rifle, 90 miles west of Vail. Weeks later, he made the 6-hour drive from Salt Lake City to revisit her remains. On April 6th, Denise Lynn Oliverson, age 25, disappeared near the Utah-Colorado border in Grand Junction while riding her bicycle to her parents' house. Her bike and sandals were found under a railroad bridge. Bundy stated that he abducted Oliverson, killed her in his car near the Utah state line, and dumped her body in the Colorado River. This admission was supported by gas receipts, which showed he was in the city the same day that she went missing. This one is particularly heart-wrenching because it involves a 12-year-old girl, and this kind of was an MO for him going forward. He started abducting younger and younger. On May 6th, Bundy parked outside of the Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello, Idaho, and after seeing 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver walking alone, lured her into his vehicle before driving her to his Holiday Inn hotel room. There, he raped Culver and drowned her in the bathtub. He disposed of her body in the Snake River north of Pocatello. Bundy reportedly provided intimate details about Lynette's personal life in his confession. That is clearly him just being fucking proud of this one. This guy is beyond a fucking monster. Bundy spent a week in Seattle with Elizabeth in early June, and they discussed getting married the following Christmas. Again, Elizabeth made no mention of her multiple discussions with authorities in King County and Salt Lake County. Bundy disclosed neither his ongoing relationship with Utah student Kim Andrews or his multiple other relationships he had going. Another kid in this one, ladies and gentlemen. He was on a new path, preying on children now. On June 28th, 15-year-old Susan Curtis vanished from the campus of Brigham Young University. Her murder became Bundy's last confession. Tape recorded moments before he entered his execution chamber. The bodies of victims Wilcox, Kent, Cunningham, Oliverson, Culver, and Curtis were never recovered. In Washington state, investigators were still struggling to analyze the Pacific Northwest murder spree that had ended as abruptly as it had begun. In an effort to make sense of an overwhelming mass of data, they resorted to the then innovative strategy of compiling a database. They employed the King County payroll computer, a huge primitive machine by contemporary standards, but the only one available for their use. After inputting the many lists they had compiled, classmates and acquaintances of each victims, Volkswagen owners named Ted, known sex offenders, and so on, they queried the computer for coincidences. Out of thousands of names, 26 turned up on 4 lists. One was Bundy. Detectives also manually compiled a list of their 100 best suspects, and Bundy was also on that list. He was literally at the top of the pile of suspects when word came from Utah to arrest this man immediately. For anyone saying, "But you said he operated from 1974 to 1978, and he's being arrested in 75, what gives?" Just buckle up, because this man ain't done killing yet. It gets way crazier. On August 16th, 1975, Bundy was arrested by Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward in Granger, Utah. Hayward observed Bundy cruising a residential area in his Volkswagen Beetle during the pre-dawn hours and fleeing at high speeds after seeing the patrol car. He also noticed that the Volkswagen's front passenger seat had been removed and placed on the rear seats. Searching the car, Hayward found a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items initially assumed to be burglary tools. Bundy explained that the ski mask was for skiing. He had found the handcuffs in a dumpster, and the rest were common household items. However, Detective Jerry Thompson remembered a similar suspect and car description from the Duranch kidnapping in November 1974 and Bundy's name from Elizabeth's phone call a month prior. In a search of Bundy's apartment, police found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a checkmark by the Wildwood Inn and a brochure that advised the Viewmont High School play in Bountiful, where Kent had disappeared. Police did not have significant evidence to detain Bundy, so he was released. Bundy later said that searchers missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photographs of his victims, which he destroyed after he was released. Get it the fuck together, detectives. Salt Lake City police placed Bundy on a 24-hour surveillance, and Thompson flew to Seattle with 2 other detectives to interview Elizabeth. She told them that in the year prior to Bundy's move to Utah, she had discovered objects that she couldn't understand in her house and in Bundy's apartment. These items included crutches, a bag of plaster of Paris that he admitted to stealing from a medical supply house, and a meat cleaver that was never for cooking. Additional objects included surgical gloves, an oriental knife in a wooden case that he kept in his glove compartment, and a sack full of women's clothing. Bundy was particularly in debt, and Elizabeth suspected that he had stolen almost everything of significant value that he possessed. When she confronted him over a new TV and stereo, he warned her, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your fucking neck." She said Bundy became very upset whenever she considered cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle. She would sometimes awaken in the middle of the night and find him under the covers with a flashlight examining her body. He kept a lug wrench taped halfway up the handle in the trunk of his car, another Volkswagen Beetle, which he often borrowed for protection. The detectives confirmed that Bundy had not been with Elizabeth on any of the nights during which the Pacific Northwest victims had vanished, nor on the day Ott and Naslund were abducted from Lake Sammamish State Park. Shortly thereafter, Elizabeth was interviewed by Seattle homicide detective Kathy McChesney and learned of the existence of Diane and her brief engagement to Bundy around Christmas '73. In September, Bundy sold his Volkswagen Beetle to a Midvale teenager. Utah police immediately impounded the vehicle, and FBI technicians dismantled and searched it. Hairs were discovered matching samples obtained from Campbell's body. Later, they also identified hair strands microscopically indistinguishable from those of Smith and Duranch. FBI lab specialist Robert Neal concluded that the presence of hair strands in one car matching 3 different victims who had never met one another to be a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity. Can you imagine being the poor teenager who bought that car from Ted Bundy? Unreal, man. On October 2nd, detectives put Bundy into a lineup. Duranch immediately identified him as Officer Roseland, and witnesses recognized him as the stranger at the Viewmont High School auditorium. There was insufficient evidence to link him to Kent, whose body had not been found, but more than enough evidence to charge him with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in Duranch's case. Great, right? Yeah. Bundy denied knowing Duranch, but had no alibi, and he was freed on $15,000 bail paid by his parents, and spent most of the time between indictments to travel to Seattle, living in Elizabeth's home. Yes, she kept having him back to live with her, even though she's been warning everyone that he's killing women that look like her. Okay. And you have a child. Maybe don't let that guy in the house. Seattle police had insufficient evidence to charge him in the Pacific Northwest murders, but kept him under close surveillance. When Ted and I stepped out on the porch to go somewhere, Elizabeth wrote, so many unmarked police cars started up that it sounded like the beginning of the Indy 500. In November, the 3 principal Bundy investigators, Terry Thompson from Utah, Robert Keppel from Washington, and Michael Fisher from Colorado met in Aspen, Colorado, and exchanged information with 30 detectives and prosecutors from 5 states. While officials left the meeting, later referred to as the Aspen Summit, convinced that Bundy was the murderer they sought, they agreed that more hard evidence would be needed before he could be charged with any of the killings. In February 1976, Bundy stood trial for the DeRange kidnapping. On the advice of his attorney, John O'Connell, he waived his right to a jury due to the negative publicity surrounding the case. After a 4-day bench trial and a weekend of deliberation, Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. found Bundy guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. Yes, you heard that. 1 to 15 years for kidnapping and assault. In October, Bundy was found hiding in the bushes in the prison yard, carrying an escape kit, road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card, and spent several weeks in solitary confinement. Later that month, Colorado authorities charged him with Campbell's murder. After a period of resistance, he waived extradition processings and was transferred to Aspen in June 1977. This is where it gets kind of crazy and even more neglectful of our uniformed police officers of the 70s. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was transported 40 miles from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for a preliminary hearing. He had elected to serve as his own attorney, and as such, was excused by the judge from wearing handcuffs or leg shackles. During a recess, Bundy asked to visit the courthouse's law library to research his case. While shielded from the guard's view behind a bookcase, he opened a window and jumped to the ground from the second story, injuring his right ankle as he landed. After shedding an outer layer of clothing, Bundy limped through Aspen as roadblocks were being set up on the outskirts, then hiked south onto Aspen Mountain. Near its summit, he broke into a hunting cabin and stole food, clothing, and a rifle. The following day, Bundy left the cabin and continued south towards the town Crested Butte, but became lost in the forest. For 2 days, he wandered aimlessly on the mountain, missing 2 trails that led downward to his intended destination. On June 10th, Bundy broke into a camping trailer on Maroon Lake, 10 miles south of Aspen, taking food and a ski parka. However, instead of continuing southward, he walked back towards Aspen, eluding roadblocks and search parties along the way. Of course he did. 3 days later, he stole a car at the edge of an Aspen golf course. Cold, sleep-deprived, and in constant pain from his sprained ankle, Bundy drove back into Aspen, where 2 police officers noticed his car weaving in and out of the lane and pulled him over. He had been a fugitive for 6 days. In the car were maps of the mountain area around Aspen that prosecutors were using to demonstrate the locations of Campbell's body. As his own attorney, Bundy had rights to discovery, indicating that his escape had been planned. Back in jail in Glenwood Springs, Bundy ignored the advice of friends and legal advisors to stay put. The case against him, already weak at best, was deteriorating steadily as pretrial motions consistently resolved in Bundy's favor and significant pieces of evidence were ruled inadmissible. A more rational defendant might have recognized that he stood a good chance of acquittal and that beating the murder charge in Colorado would probably have dissuaded other prosecutors. With as little as a year and a half to serve on the DeRange conviction, had Ted persevered, he could have been a free man. Instead, Bundy assembled a new escape plan. He acquired a detailed floor plan of the Garfield County Jail and a hacksaw blade from another inmate. He accumulated $500 in cash that he had smuggled in over a 6-month period by visitors, Boone in particular. During the evenings, while other prisoners were showering, Bundy sawed a hole about 1 square foot between the steel-reinforced bars in the ceiling. Having lost 35 pounds on purpose, he was able to wriggle through and explore the crawl spaces above in the weeks that followed. He did this multiple times to plan a route throughout the vents. Multiple reports from an informant of movement within the ceilings during the night were never investigated. More of our finest work, gentlemen. By late 1977, Bundy's impending trial had become quite controversial in the small town of Aspen, and Bundy filed a motion for change of venue to Denver. On December 23rd, the Aspen trial judge granted this request, but to Colorado Springs, where juries had historically been hostile to murder suspects. On the night of December 30th, with most of the jail staff on Christmas break and non-violent prisoners on furlough with their families, Bundy piled books and files in his bed, covered them with a blanket to simulate his sleeping body, and climbed into the crawlspace he created. He broke through the ceiling into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was out for the evening with his wife, changed into street clothes from the jailer's closet, and walked right out the front door. After stealing a car, Bundy drove eastward out of Glenwood Springs, but the car soon broke down in the mountains on Interstate 70. A passing motorist gave him a ride into Vail, 60 miles to the east. From there, he caught a bus to Denver, where he boarded a morning flight to Chicago. Back in Glenwood Springs, the jail's skeleton crew did not discover the escape until noon on December 31st, more than 17 hours later. By then, Bundy had already been in Chicago. From Chicago, Bundy traveled by train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. 5 days later, he stole a car and drove south to Atlanta, where he boarded a bus and arrived in Tallahassee, Florida on the morning of January 8th. He stayed for one night at a hotel before renting a room under the alias Chris Hagen at a boarding house near the Florida State University campus. Bundy later said that he initially resolved to find legitimate employment and refrain from further criminal activity. Yeah, right. Knowing he could probably remain free and undetected in Florida indefinitely as long as he did not attract the attention of police. But his lone job application, the only one he even tried for, at a construction site, had to be abandoned when he was asked to produce identification. Fucking duh. He reverted to his old habits of shoplifting and stealing money and credit cards from women's wallets left in shopping carts at grocery stores. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, 1 week after his arrival in Tallahassee, Bundy entered FSU's Chi Omega sorority house through a rear door with a faulty locking mechanism. Beginning at about 2:45 a.m., he bludgeoned Margaret Elizabeth Bowman, age 21, with a piece of oak firewood as she slept, then garroted her with a nylon stocking. He then entered the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Jeanette Levy and beat her unconscious, strangled her, tore one of her nipples, bit deeply into her left buttock, and sexually assaulted her with a hair mist bottle. In an adjoining bedroom, he attacked Kathy Kleiner, a 21-year-old, breaking her jaw and deeply lacerating her shoulder, and Karen Chandler, age 21, who suffered a concussion, broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger. Chandler and Kleiner survived the attack. Kleiner attributed their survival to an automobile's headlights illuminating the interior of their room and frightening away the attacker. Tallahassee detectives determined that the 4 attacks took place in a total of less than 15 minutes, within earshot of more than 30 witnesses who heard nothing. Damn, this dude is lucky. After leaving the sorority house, Bundy broke into a basement apartment 8 blocks away and attacked 21-year-old FSU student Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She was left with permanent deafness in her left ear and equilibrium damage that ended her dance career altogether. On Thomas's bed, police found a semen stain and a pantyhose mask containing 2 hairs similar to Bundy's in class and characteristic. On February 8th, Bundy drove 150 miles east to Jacksonville in a stolen FSU van. In a parking lot, he approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, the daughter of the Jacksonville Police Department's chief of detectives, identifying himself as Richard Burton, Fire Department, but retreated when Parmenter's older brother arrived and confronted him. Fucking epic older brother. Kudos for stepping in. But he still did get what he wanted that day. He attacked another child. That same afternoon, he backtracked 60 miles westward to Lake City. At Lake City Junior High School, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach was summoned to her homeroom by a teacher to retrieve a forgotten purse. She never returned to class. 7 weeks later, after an intensive search, her partially mummified remains were found in a pig farrowing shed near Suwannee River State Park. Forensic experts surmised that Leach had been sexually assaulted before having her throat cut and her genitals mutilated with a knife.
One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? What was there? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
On February 12th, with insufficient cash to pay his overdue rent and a growing suspicion that police were closing in on him, Bundy stole a car and fled Tallahassee, driving westward across the Florida Panhandle. 3 days later, at around 1 a.m., he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line after a wants and warrants check showed his Volkswagen Beetle was stolen. Yes, he was back in a Volkswagen Beetle. Dumbass. When told he was under arrest, Bundy kicked Lee's legs out from under him and took off running. Lee fired 2 warning shots, then gave chase and tackled him. The two struggled over Lee's gun before the officer finally subdued and arrested Bundy. In the stolen vehicle were 3 sets of IDs belonging to female FSU students, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen television set. Also found were a pair of dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses and a pair of plaid socks, later identified as the disguise worn by Richard Burton Fire Department in Jacksonville. As Lee transported his suspect to jail, unaware that he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, he heard Bundy say, "I wish you had killed me." In May 1978, a Florida grand jury indicted Bundy on charges of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and burglary for the Chi Omega killings and assaults. The trial was covered by 250 reporters from 5 continents and was the first to be televised nationally in the United States. Despite the presence of 5 court-appointed attorneys, Bundy again handled much of his own defense. From the beginning, he sabotaged the entire defense's efforts out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. Nelson later wrote, "Ted was facing murder charges, with a possible death sentence, and all that mattered to him, apparently, was that he'd be in charge." According to Mike Minerva, a Tallahassee public defender and member of the defense team, a pre-trial plea bargain was negotiated in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing Levy, Bowman, and Leach in exchange for a firm 75-year sentence. Prosecutors were amenable to a deal, by one account, because prospects of losing at trial were very good. Bundy, on the other hand, saw the plea bargain not only as a means to avoiding the death penalty, but also as a tactical move he could enter his plea, then wait a few years for evidence to disintegrate or become lost and for witnesses to die, move on, or retract their testimony. Once the case against him had deteriorated beyond repair, he could file a post-conviction motion to set aside the plea and secure an acquittal. At the last minute, however, Bundy refused the deal. It made him realize that he was going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and say he was guilty, Minerva said. He just couldn't do it.
Your Honor, I am here today because I wish to be acquitted, because I assert my innocence. If my counsel tell me that they can not do that for me, if my counsel tell me that there's no way that they can see, or very little chance that they can see, of achieving that goal for me, then I say that we have some fundamental problems, some fundamental conflicts.
At trial, crucial testimony came from Chi Omega sorority members Connie Hastings, who placed Bundy in the vicinity of the sorority house that evening, and Nita Neary, who saw him leaving the house clutching the murder weapon. Incriminating physical evidence included impressions of the bite wounds Bundy had inflicted on Levy's left buttock, which forensics odontologist Richard Soveron matched to castings of Bundy's teeth, which they got, by the way, by showing up to his cell and forcing him down on the ground to bite a mold. Badass. They were over his bullshit. The jury was also allowed to hear details of Duranche's kidnapping and finally deliberated for less than 7 hours before convicting Bundy on July 4th, 1979 of the Bowman and Levy murders. 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the assaults on Kleiner, Chandler, and Thomas, and 2 counts of burglary. Trial Judge Edward Cower imposed death sentences for the murder convictions. Bundy appealed his conviction and death sentence to the Supreme Court of Florida, but they affirmed them. 6 months later, a second trial took place in Orlando for the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Leach. Bundy was found guilty once again after less than 8 hours of deliberation, due principally to the testimony of an eyewitness who saw him leading Leach from the schoolyard to his stolen van. Important material evidence included clothing fibers with an unusual manufacturing error found in the van and on Leach's body, which matched fibers from the jacket Bundy was wearing when he was arrested. During the penalty phase of the Leach trial, Bundy took advantage of an obscure Florida law providing that a marriage declaration in court, in the presence of a judge, constituted a legal marriage. As he was questioning Boone, who had moved to Florida to be near Bundy, had testified on his behalf during both trials, and again was testifying on his behalf as a character witness, he asked her to marry him. She accepted, and Bundy declared to the court that they were legally married. He was so fucking proud of this too. It was pathetic. He thought people were just going to stand up and cheer for him.
Carol, do you want to marry me?
Thanks.
And I want to marry you.
Yes.
And I do want to marry you.
On February 10th, 1980, Bundy was sentenced for a 3rd time to death. As the sentence was announced, he reportedly stood up and shouted, "Tell the jury they were wrong."
Tell the jury they were wrong.
This 3rd death sentence would be the one ultimately carried out nearly 9 years later. Only his now wife, Carol, would appear before the court to beg for mercy. On October 24th, 1981, Carol gave birth to a daughter, Rose Bundy, while conjugal visits were not allowed at the Florida State Prison in Ryford, where Bundy was incarcerated. Inmates were known to pool their money in order to bribe guards to allow them intimate time alone with their female visitors. Shortly after the conclusion of the Leach trial and the beginning of the long appeals process that followed, Bundy initiated a series of interviews with Stephen McCod and Hugh Ainsworth, speaking mostly in 3rd person to avoid the stigma of confession. He began, for the first time, to divulge details of his crimes and thought processes. Bundy recounted his career as a thief, confirming Elizabeth's longtime suspicion that he had shoplifted virtually everything of substance that he owned. The big payoff for me, he said, was actually possessing whatever I had stolen. I really enjoyed having something that I had wanted and gone out and taken. Possession proved to be an important motive for rape and murder as well. Sexual assault, he said, fulfilled his need to totally possess his victims. At first, Bundy killed his victims as a matter of expediency, to eliminate the possibility of being caught. But later, murder became part of the adventure. The ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of the life, he said, and then the physical possession of the remains. Bundy also confided in Special Agent William Hagmaier of the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. Hagmaier was struck by the deep, almost mystical satisfaction Bundy took in murder. He said that after a while, murder is not just a crime of lust or violence. It becomes possession. They are a part of you. The victim becomes a part of you. And you two are forever one. And the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them. Bundy told Hagmaier that he considered himself to be an amateur or impulsive killer in his early days, before moving into what he termed his prime or predator phase at about the time of Healy's murder in 1974. This implied that he began killing well before 74, although he never explicitly admitted having done. In July 1984, prison guards found 2 hacksaw blades hidden in Bundy's cell. A steel bar in one of the cell's windows had been sawed completely through at the top and bottom and glued back into place with a homemade soap-based adhesive. Several months later, Bundy was moved to a different cell after guards found an unauthorized mirror. Shortly thereafter, he was charged with a disciplinary infraction for unauthorized correspondence with another high-profile criminal, John Hinckley Jr. In October 1984, Bundy contacted Keppel and offered to share his self-proclaimed expertise in serial killing psychology in the ongoing hunt in Washington for the Green River Killer, later identified as Gary Ridgway. I also did an episode on him. Go back and listen to that if you'd like. That one was kind of a short one, though. I'd like to do a longer dive on him. Keppel and Green River Task Force Detective Dave Reichert interviewed Bundy, but Ridgway remained at large for a further 17 years. Keppel published a detailed documentation of the Green River interviews and later collaborated with McCaud on another examination of the interview material. In early 1986, an execution date, March 4th, was set on the Chi Omega convictions. The United States Supreme Court issued a brief stay, but the execution was quickly rescheduled in April, shortly after the new date, July 2nd, was announced. Bundy finally confessed to Hagmaier and Nelson what they believed was a full range of his depredations, including details of what he did to some of his victims after their deaths. He told them that he revisited Taylor Mountain, Issaquah, and other secondary crime scenes, often several times, to lie with his victims and perform sexual acts with their bodies until putrefaction forced him to stop. In some cases, he drove for several hours each way and remained the entire night with some of the bodies. In Utah, he applied makeup to Smith's lifeless face and repeatedly washed Amy's hair. "If you've got time," he told Hagmaier, "they can be anything you want them to be." Bundy decapitated approximately 12 of his victims with a hacksaw and kept at least one group of severed heads, probably the 4 later found on Taylor Mountain, Rancourt, Parks, Ball, and Healy, in his apartment for a period of time before disposing of them. Less than 15 hours before the scheduled July 2nd execution, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit stayed it indefinitely and remanded the Chi Omega case back to the Southern District of Florida due to legal issues, including Bundy's mental competency to stand trial and an erroneous instruction by the trial judge during the penalty phase requiring the jury to break a 6-6 tie between life imprisonment and the death penalty, which ultimately were never resolved. A new date, November 18th, was then set to carry out the Leach sentence. The 11th Circuit Court issued a stay on November 17th, the day before this execution. In mid-1988, the 11th Circuit ruled against Bundy, and in December, the Supreme Court denied a motion to review the ruling over the dissents of Justice Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan Jr. within hours of that final denial. A firm execution date of January 24, 1989 was announced. Bundy's journey through the appeals courts has been unusually rapid for a capital murder case. Contrary to popular belief, the courts moved Bundy as fast as they could. Even the prosecutors acknowledged that Bundy's lawyers never employed delaying tactics. Though people everywhere seethed at the apparent delay in execution, Ted Bundy was actually on the fast track. With all appeal avenues exhausted and no further motivation to deny his crimes, Bundy agreed to speak frankly with investigators. He confessed to Keppel that he had committed all 8 of the Washington and Oregon homicides for which he was the prime suspect. He described 3 additional previously unknown victims in Washington and 2 in Oregon, who he declined to identify if indeed he ever knew their identities. He said he left a fifth corpse, Manson's, on Taylor Mountain, but incinerated her head in Elizabeth's fireplace. He described the Issaquah crime scene where the bones of Ott, Naslund, and Hawkins were found, and it was almost like he was just there, Keppel said. Like he was seeing everything. He was infatuated with the idea because he spent so much time there. He is just totally consumed with murder all the time. Nelson's impressions were similar. It was the absolute misogyny of his crimes that stunned me, she wrote. His manifest rage against women. He had no compassion at all. He was totally engrossed in the details. His murders were his life's accomplishments. Bundy confessed to detectives from Idaho, Utah, and Colorado that he had committed numerous additional homicides, including several that were unknown to the police. He explained that when he was in Utah, he could bring his victims back to his apartment, where he would reenact scenarios depicted on the covers of detective magazines. This guy was living in the craziest of fantasy worlds. A new ulterior strategy quickly became apparent. He was withholding many details, hoping to parlay the incomplete information into yet another stay of execution. Despite warnings from his attorneys that the spectacle of peddling information for time would turn the courts against him, Bundy began offering investigators pieces of information regarding some of his murders. There are other buried remains in Colorado, he admitted, but he refused to elaborate. The new strategy, immediately dubbed Ted's Bones for Time scheme, served only to deepen the resolve of authorities to see Bundy executed on schedule and yielded little to no new information. He was trying so hard to kill time. In some cases, where he did give details, nothing was found. Colorado detective Matt Linville interpreted this as a conflict between his desire to postpone his execution by divulging information and his need to remain in total possession, the only person who knew of the victims' true resting places. When it became clear that no further stays would be forthcoming from the courts, Bundy supporters began lobbying for the only remaining option, executive clemency, which is literally just a pardon to relieve him of his charges. Some people are straight up stupid. Diana Weiner, a young Florida attorney and Bundy's last purported love interest, asked the families of several Colorado and Utah victims to petition Florida Governor Bob Martinez for a postponement to give Bundy more time to reveal more information. All refused, obviously. He killed their fucking loved ones, and you have the balls to ask the families to sign a petition to keep him alive longer. Jesus. The families already believed that the victims were dead, and that Ted had killed them, wrote Nelson. They didn't need his confession. Martinez made it clear that he would not agree to further delays in any case. We are not going to have the system manipulated, he told reporters. For him to be negotiating for his life over the bodies of victims is despicable. Carroll had campaigned Bundy's innocence throughout all of his trials and felt deeply betrayed by his admission that he was in fact guilty. She moved back to Washington with her daughter and refused to accept his phone call on the morning of his execution. She was hurt by his relationship with Diana Weiner, Nelson wrote, and devastated by his sudden wholesale confessions in his last days. So basically, she probably believed he did it, but then when he confessed, she saw weakness in him. To this day, nobody knows who Ted Bundy's daughter is. They changed their names and moved to an undisclosed area. Probably for the best. Hagmeyer was present during Bundy's final interviews with the investigators. The night before his execution, he talked about suicide. He did not want to give the state the satisfaction of watching him die, Hagmeyer said. Bundy also rejected his last meal and was executed in the Ryford electric chair at 7:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 24, 1989. His last words were directed at his attorney, Jim Coleman, and Methodist minister Fred Lawrence. Jim, Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends. What a sweet man, yeah? A few hours prior to his execution, Bundy was allowed to make 2 phone calls to his mother, during which he apologized to her, stating, "I'm so sorry I've given you all such grief, but a part of me was hidden all this time." Hundreds of revealers sang, danced, and set off fireworks in a pasture across from the prison as the execution was carried out. They then cheered as the white hearse containing Bundy's corpse departed the prison. He was cremated in Gainesville, Florida, and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location in the Cascade Range of Washington State, in accordance with his will. Most believe, and I also believe, he had them scattered in the mountains where he kept many of his victims, so he could be with them forever. That is the life, loved ones, and murders of Theodore Bundy. He is one of the Mount Rushmore of serial killers, and I personally hate this kind of mentality. He had such a I'm better than everybody attitude, and I'm smarter than you, and I'm more handsome than you. He had the kind of personality that I hate the most in psychopaths. And the poor victims of these women, like I said, it was 20 plus confirmed, 30 plus admitted to, and they think maybe even more. He is a vile monster of the highest degree, and where I don't believe fully in religion, if there is a hell, I hope he's fucking burning there. I want to thank you all for coming along on this ride with me. It was not an easy one. And as always, thank you for listening.
I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for and receive the pain for that act. But I will not share the burden for the guilt.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy. Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.